covering chapter 8 today, and it is a pretty long lecture when I do teach this in class. So let's get started and see how long it takes when it comes to teaching online. So chapter 8, we are going to be looking at climate, and at the end, towards the end of the chapter, we're going to be looking at climate change. So first, we're going to look at how climates are distributed across the globe, and really different patterns that we find, right? When it comes to geography, it really is about these similarities and organizing them, right? So when it comes to climates, we're going to look at this different climate zones and how they're distributed across the planet. So let's get started. We're going to look at a certain climate classification system. And the one that we're going to be talking about in class, the one that we will be using, is the Köppen climate classification system. And we'll be focusing some time on the Mediterranean climate zone. And the reason that we're going to focus on that is because it's our climate zone here in Southern California. So climate classification has existed with one of the earliest classification systems about 2,200 years ago, organized by the Greeks. And they kind of just broke it down into three basic climate zones. So they said that there was a temperate zone, there's a torrid zone, and there's a frigid zone. And just by looking at that and listening to those different words or those titles, you can kind of guess frigid is cold, right? So you can guess that frigid would probably be in the higher latitudes, right? That's kind of like logically where we guess those cold areas are. And that's correct. So let's look at what that looks like. So your frigid zone is going to be up here, yeah, in the higher latitudes. Then you have your temperate, which is kind of middle, so your mid latitudes. Temperate sounds like kind of not too hot, not too cold, right? And then you have your torrid zones, which are going to be towards the equator. So this is how they broke it down. This is not accepted. This is not used anymore. Today, we use this handsome fellow's climate classification system, Mr. Vladimir Köppen. He organized and this is the most widely used system. So he was a Russian-born German climatologist, and he kind of broke down climates into 5 major climate groups, all under A, B, C, D, E. And then under those, they're just kind of like more specific because, you know, precipitation and climate, and you can't just have only 5 categories. There has to kind of be like these subdivided groups, okay? And really his goal was to comprehend the general pattern. Of course there are anomalies. Nothing is black and white, but we did in this sense find like this general pattern of climates. So here are those 5 different climate zones, and you'll notice that there is an H over here, and this is kind of like an outlier, okay? So this doesn't follow what all these 5 groups follow. This kind of has its own system, kind of, right? You'll see that. I'll explain that. So you have group A, B, C, D, E, and under each group, those are kind of like separated and broken down into really their own categories. And so I'm not going to have you memorize exactly every letter, like AF is tropical wet, BSH, that would be subtropical mid-latitude, subtropical steppe. So I'm not going to, you wouldn't be responsible for every single subdivision. If you were maybe in a graduate level class, yes, you'd be responsible for memorizing all that. But I do want you, what I want you to pay attention to is your tropical climates, dry, mild mid-latitude, and severe mid-latitude, and polar. So all of these, really most of these are going to be based on latitude. So you have your tropical. With everything that you've learned in this class, what do you think about when you hear tropical? Hopefully you're thinking about the tropics, right? Which is going to be like 30 degrees-ish, right? Around that. And when you hear dry, that's It's not related to latitude in this sense. But hopefully you're thinking of those subtropical highs and those western areas of continents, right? We talked about that a little bit. Mild mid-latitude. So mid-latitudes are not going to be those high latitudes in the poles or the Arctic or Antarctic. It's going to be kind of in the middle, that sweet spot. Not going to be the tropics, and it's not going to be those high latitudes. So mid-latitudes. There's mild, and then there's severe. So there's severe mid-latitudes, which are going to be much colder than your mild mid-latitudes, okay? So that really basically is your breakdown of your climate zones. But let's keep going. I'm going to show you the map. So this is the map of how our climate zones look across the globe, right? So right in the tropics, right around here, you're going to have your tropical humid climates. Why are they tropical humid? Well, now you should know that it is the intertropical convergence zone that is really regulating and in charge of that moisture, that humidity, that constant rainfall, the constant band of clouds along the equator and the tropics, giving you lots of rainfall. So lots of rainfall is going to give you what? Lots of lush green vegetation. This is where we're going to find our rainforests, okay, all along that equator belt. This is not a class, this is not a lecture that we're going to cover biomes quite yet, but biomes is very much related to climate. Biomes are ecological regions, which are just vegetation, right? So it could be tundra, prairie, tropical rainforest, desert, grassland. And so vegetation is very related to climate. I mean, if you have a lot of rainfall, you're going to have great, lush vegetation. If you have very pronounced seasons, you're going to have deciduous trees, right? They're going to grow in the spring. There's going to be a wet season. There's going to be a dry season. They're going to lose those leaves. So when we talk about climate, it's very much related to vegetation. And later on this semester, about chapter 10, we're going to be going over biomes, very similar to this. But I want you guys to understand and start thinking latitudinally and putting all that information into this. So when we talked about those subtropical highs, we talked about the living closer to the oceans, that brings in more moisture, the ITCZ, the Arctic, all those things. You guys already have that knowledge, and you can logically put that in and think, okay, our dry area is going to be here under the subtropical highs. Our wet areas obviously are going to be under the ITCZ. Dry areas are going to be in the poles, the high latitudes, right? They're cold and dry. So hopefully you guys are thinking about that when we're going through this, okay? So you're applying what you have learned in this class, hopefully. All right? But either way, I'm here to guide you guys on that. So the Köppen classification system is classified by two things. Number one, temperature. Number two, precipitation. That's climate, right? Basically, I mean, humidity, stability, all those other things are really important too. But just for the sake of this, we're going to do temperature and precipitation, okay? And we're not ignoring vegetation. Again, I just said this. When we look at climate, obviously vegetation is important, because as a geographer, you're not ignoring everything. When you talk about something, you're drawing connections, right? The beginning of this class, we said that everything is interconnected, right? And that's the beauty of geography. It's not just we're only looking at climate modules or climate climographs. I also get to learn about the cool plants and animals, putting it very simply, that live within that climate zone. And that's something that made my love for geography grow, is that, yeah, it's a science, but then it's like a mixture of other things, right? All right, let's keep going. So we're going to go through every single group. Yeah, so we're going to start with the tropical humid climates. So these climate zones are going to be the A group. Obviously, they're, by the name, you can say that they're located within the tropics. They are noted for their lack of coldness, not so much for their warmth. When you hear tropical, you probably think warm, but in this case, they're more noted for their lack of coldness, okay? They are the only true winterless climates of the world. And I've talked about this before. When we look at the equator and any place along the equator in the tropics, you don't have your pronounced seasons. Your pronounced seasons, the further away you move from the equator latitudinally, as you go up in latitude, then you get those pronounced spring, summer, winter, fall, right? Even here in Los Angeles, we're not as pronounced as, say, Boston, Massachusetts, right? Like, I know someone that lives there, and those seasons are very pronounced. I mean, you got the beautiful change of colors in the fall. Versus here, yeah, we still have fall, but we're in mid-October and it's still very warm, right? But now you move even lower in latitude, you go into those tropical latitudes, those tropics and the equator, you're not going to have fall. You're not going to have spring, summer, winter, right? Yes, you might be going through it, but you're not physically experiencing it, okay? So they're broken down into tropical wet, AF, tropical savanna, AW, and tropical monsoon. And that is based on precipitation because some areas are going to have much more rain than other areas. Like your tropical wet, very wet. Tropical savanna, you're going to have some points in the year where there's less water than a tropical wet. Tropical monsoon, you're going to have that influx of a large amount of precipitation of a downpour. It's going to be quite different when you look at a climograph. So here is where these tropical tropical humid climates are located. These are all group A, and tropical wet is the darker green, AF. Tropical monsoon is this kind of like a muted green. And then the other color, like a yellow green, is going to be your tropical savanna. So also what I want you guys to look at this as are kind of like transition zones, right? The rainiest areas are going to be along the equator. Now, as you move away, there's like these transition zones because we're moving into drier parts of the world. You wouldn't just like be in a jungle and then you walk into a desert, right? These are all like transitional zones into different ecoregions or a different climate zone. Does that make sense? So you have tropical wet within 5 to 10 degrees of the equator, tropical savanna, tropical monsoon. You guys can pause it here and take a look at this this table, and it just tells you like the dominant controls, right? Obviously latitude, the ITCZ is huge when you talk about what controls these climates within the equator, within the tropics, right? And for the monsoon, remember that the ITCZ meanders. So when it does meander, those trade winds bring in all that water onto land. I hope you guys remember that from chapter 5. So that would be what's in control of your AM. And here are the climographs I keep mentioning. A climograph is really important when you're a geographer, especially when you're in your graduate level studies. You might take a whole atmospheric science class, and I can tell you it's very exciting. Just kidding, it's really not. I mean, I don't know. I think I don't want to say this because this goes on YouTube. It's an exciting class and I had a great teacher. So this is a climograph here. I mean, it's all relative, right? This is a climograph here. So you have on the bottom, you have January, February, March, April, May, June. I cannot unsee this at the end of the calendar. It's Jason Derulo. I hope you guys get it. Okay, so January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. Obviously, right? You have the months. Then along the sides, you have your temperature on this side. So you have either Fahrenheit or Celsius. And then you have your precipitation on this side here in centimeters or inches, okay? So for the month of January, your line up here, the line graph of the climate graph portion, is going to be your temperature, all right? And the bars of this graph is going to be your amount of precipitation. So look at this climate graph here. You have very similar temperature all year long. There's not much highs. I saw something happen right now. Okay, there's not much highs and lows, okay? So it's just kind of like a very similar all year. Remember, we're in the tropics. And so when we get to like the mid-latitudes, the severe mid-latitude, the mild mid-latitudes, it's going to be much different. There's going to be more of a shift. So all year long, you have abundant rainfall, pretty similar rainfall. So we're looking at two places. We're looking at Singapore, which is at 1 degree north, 1 degree above the equator, and we're looking at Peru, which is about 4 degrees below the equator. Different hemispheres, but very, very similar in climate. Abundant rainfall all year long. I mean, all above 13 centimeters, 20 centimeters, which is a lot of rainfall all year long, okay? So here are your climate graphs for your AF. And then for AW, which is going to be your tropical savanna climate zone, look at how different it is. I mean, just a few degrees north or south of that tropical wet. This is going to be much different because you have a dry season. However, in the rainy season, you still have a lot of water. So you're going to have vegetation that is still lush and green, but not as prominent as a tropical rainforest. That previous slide would be a tropical rainforest. This would be more like a tropical deciduous forest, okay? Your climate zone here is your tropical savanna. Low sun, dry season, and prominent wet season, okay? So you have Acapulco, Mexico is a tropical savanna climate zone. So is Cancun. And Normanton, Australia is a tropical savanna climate zone. So when we talk about an AW, a tropical savanna climate zone, that type of vegetation here is going to be like a tropical deciduous. You're moving away from that tropical rainforest. It's kind of like this transition zone. If you were to go to Cancun, you would think you're in a tropical rainforest. However, it is deciduous, so you still have some trees that lose their leaves in the fall, in the dry season. But it's still very, very wet. Okay, wet and humid. Don't let that confuse you. You also have your hurricane seasons too. Yucatan, Mexico is at 18 degrees north, 89 degrees west, just about. And this is the Yucatan jungle. Very large corridor for your panthers or jaguars. Unfortunately, they are in danger due to habitat loss and development. So the numbers of jaguars are dwindling, and if you know anything about the Mayan culture, the jaguar is a very, very important Mayan icon, very important. And when you do go, if you guys have ever been to Cancun, if you've ever been to Chichen Itza, that very famous large structure, and you travel away from your hotel zone, your hotel that you're at, it's jungle as far as you can see. And there's still a lot of native people that live there. And I asked one of the tour guides, and they told me that they're still allowed actually to hunt for the jaguars. And they do. And there's also a main road. And when we went, I think I've been there two times. We were supposed to go in June. Wasn't able to go because 2020, you know. So when we did go last June, I asked one of the tour guides, like, hey, there's like signs that say like, oh, jaguar crossing, which is crazy, right? Like, we don't see that here. I asked one of the tour guides if they've ever seen one, and they said, yeah, that they have seen a jaguar actually cross the road. And there's not a lot of roads there. It's like one huge highway along the coast when you're getting to your hotel from the Airport. So there's going to be a video link and a question, and not a question, but just a video link for you to watch a little bit about the conservation efforts for the jaguars in the peninsula of Yucatan. Okay, so look for that in your module. And so here are some pictures of me. Yay! I took these pictures actually. Well, I didn't take this one, but these are my pictures. And I just want you guys to look at how it is very dense, but it's not quite a tropical rainforest. It's a tropical deciduous forest for AW. This is tropical savanna climate zone, okay? And so those were pictures that I got to take. So let's move on to more dry climates. These are going to be obviously your dry climates, Group B. They cover about 30% of the land area of the world, more than any climate zone. Okay, these are dry areas. And so dry areas are going to develop anywhere for two reasons, because there's a lack of uplift. Why do we need uplift? Air uplift. For condensation, right? Evaporation, condensation, and then rainfall. So if you don't have that uplift, there's not going to be any source of moisture. So that's one reason these places are very dry, and because of lack of moisture in the air, okay? So those two reasons are going to give you dry climates. Okay, the concept is complex, but because it involves balance between precipitation, evapotranspiration, it not only depends on the rainfall, but also the temperature. So a place for it to be dry, right? The largest expanses of dry areas are in subtropical latitudes. So remember, you have that subtropical high, that permanent ridge of high pressure that is in control of these dry areas. In the mid-latitudes, dry climates are found in areas cut off from sources of moisture. There are two main categories. You have your desert and you have your steppe. The only difference is your desert is going to be very dry. Your steppe is going to be semi-arid, and arid is more of a lack of moisture. I know it sounds the same as dry, but there's a little bit of a difference there. Okay, so you're going to have your desert and steppe. All right, let's look at where these dry, look how much they cover. And I want you guys to pay attention to these climate zones and how they cover the land. Okay, because when we get to our climate zone, I want you to notice how unique they are. So here is our dry areas. Remember that our high pressure zones are here, right? Subtropical highs are just about 30 degrees, right there, right there. So that has a lot to do with why we have these dry areas in the world, okay? Because of those ridges of high pressure right where I drew those high pressure zones. And so dominant controls, subtropical desert, a reason why it's the subsidence from subtropical highs, cool ocean currents, by rain shadow of mountains, distance from sources of moisture. So these are all different reasons why these places are dry. Let's look at this climograph. Look at the precipitation in comparison with that climograph that we just looked at. I mean, the numbers were way up there, right? So look at how little rainfall they get, almost nothing. Okay, so Alice Springs, Australia, Yuma, Arizona, Lima, Peru, almost no rainfall at all. And so these are your dry areas of the world. Here's another one. Very, very dry. All right, so we're getting into Group C, and I'm going to spend some time, quite some time, on your Mediterranean climate zone because it is a climate zone here in Southern California, specifically Los Angeles. Okay, your mild mid-latitude climates are your Group C. Remember, they are subcategorized into 3 different ones in this case. They are made up of a transition between warmer tropical climates and colder, severe climates, mid-latitude climates. So it's kind of like the sweet spot. So you have your tropical climates down here, severe cold climates up here, and right in the middle, right where we're at in Southern California, Los Angeles, and other places too, obviously, is just that spot right in the middle, okay? Transition between warmer tropical climates and colder, severe mid-latitude climates. Your summers are long and hot, winters are short and relatively mild. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, right? That's like what we experience. Short, mild winters, long summers, okay? Mid-latitudes are a region of air mass contrast, creating a varied atmospheric disturbances and weather variability. Seasonal rhythm of temperatures is usually more prominent than that of precipitation. Tropics, tropical seasons are, what? Never mind. Sorry. Sometimes, I don't really read from my notes anymore when I lecture in class. So for lecturing online, I've been reading my notes and I'm like, what? This doesn't make sense. So just ignore what I just said. So let's look at some categories, okay? We're going to spend extra time on the Mediterranean climate zone because that's Los Angeles. And I just think it's important for you guys to be appreciative of where you live, of your climate zone and the vegetation within that climate zone because it's unique. And that's important for you guys to learn. So your red here is your Mediterranean climate zone, right? Then you also have your humid subtropical, CFA, CWA, and your marine west coast, which is CFB. So they're very different, okay? Similar in the long summers, short winters, but Southern California versus Oregon, different type of weather, right? But it's still your mild mid-latitudes. And then your humid subtropical, much different than here. What I want you guys to look at here is all the red on this map here. That is your Mediterranean climate zone. Look how little, I mean, you can barely see it, right? So you have red here in Southern California. You got red in Chile, just a dot. South Africa, Australia, and obviously the Mediterranean basin. This is where the name for the climate zone comes from. But I want you guys to realize that it is very unique, very small, the smallest in all the climate zones. But I would say that it is one of the best climate zones, and I think obviously we pay for it in our price of living here in Los Angeles. But not only just is it nice to live in, but it is amazing for growing certain types of crops and very expensive crops. So we have a great wine economy, right? Because we grow grapes really, really well in the Mediterranean climate zone. Where else does good, I'm not a wine drinker, I'm a IPA drinker on the weekends, but where does good wine also come from? Chile, Australia, obviously Italy. So it's not like a coincidence. It's because of the sun all year long. That's really what it is. It's one of the best climate zones for agriculture. Unfortunately, the problem here in California is, yeah, we have great weather, but there is a stress on water as a resource, right? There's not enough water for people to live here, let alone to grow things like water-intensive crops like pomegranates, almonds, grapes. We're growing rice in Sacramento. Like all these things are water-intensive. So we'll talk, I mean, I don't know, we don't talk about water in this class. If you take my environmental geography class, we do talk about water and really what's going on with California water. So Dominant controls of this climate zone, your Mediterranean climate zone where Los Angeles is your subtropical high, stability in the summer, your westerly winds. Humid subtropical, your westerly winds bring in that moisture from the ocean, and these are those eastern southern states, right? That have that humid subtropical climate zone, your marine west coast, westerly flow, and that oceanic influence all year long. We're looking at Oregon, Alaska, Washington. Those are all marine west coast. Okay, so we're looking at Los Angeles, California, Mediterranean climate zone, and Cape Town, South Africa. They're on different hemispheres. So when we're in summer, they're in winter, right? When they're in winter, we're in summer. However, their seasons, if you're in summer in Cape Town, South Africa, you would probably feel like you were here in Los Angeles. It's just in a different time of year, right? So let's look at their precipitation totals. South Africa gets about 51 centimeters a year. Los Angeles gets about 38 a year if we're lucky, right? Their temperature, about 17 degrees Fahrenheit on average in Los Angeles, and 15 degrees Fahrenheit annual average in Los Angeles. Your temperature range, I'm sorry, in South Africa. So very, very similar. This here is a picture of probably, I'm going to say, our Santa Monica Hills, because there's a lot of coast live oak there. And our vegetation here is named chaparral. Very similar in Cape Town, South Africa. Why? Because they have the same amount of rainfall and sunlight all year long. So it's not going to be the same exact type of plants, but they're going to grow the same. They're going to have the same tendencies, if that makes sense. And it's going to look very similar. You're also going to have the same type of fauna or wildlife that lives there. So let's look more deeply at our vegetation types and ecosystems here in Southern California. Because of our mild winters and warm long summers, we have a very specific type of vegetation in Southern California. The name of the vegetation is called chaparral. The name of the climate zone, make sure you write this down, is Mediterranean climate zone, okay? But I'm going to talk about the biome. I'm going to talk about the vegetation. We aren't only talking about climate zone, but it's important for you guys to learn about the vegetation type. Okay, California's chaparral, it is very unique. So maybe this looks familiar to you guys. Hopefully you guys like to get out there and do some trail running or hiking. I sure do. I go at least twice a week to the local hills in our chaparral backyard. It's absolutely beautiful, very unique. It harbors 20% of the Earth's plant species. 20%, guys, that's a lot, right? Most of us might take our backyard for granted, think, oh, it's boring, it's not exciting, it's just hills and trees. But it is very, very unique. Coastal sage scrub or chaparral is one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. It is a biodiversity hotspot. It's one of the only biodiversity hotspots in the developed world. That's pretty amazing. And it is threatened, unfortunately, because of wildfires, because of land use, because of population, because of resources, right? It's a great place to live, but it does unfortunately come with that issue. Too many people, not enough homes. We are sprawling outwards. So I'm kind of over talking here today. So here are some beautiful pictures of our national forest, our Los Angeles National Forest, and just some pictures of our chaparral backyard. So if you go hiking or up to the hills, there's a certain smell. And it's a little mixture of sweetgrass, but a lot of it is sage. Sage is very important here in Southern California. It was and is very important for the Native Americans who use it in a lot of their cultural practices. I mean, if you burn sage, it's like a limpieza, right? You're cleaning the bad negative energy from your life, which I think everybody should be doing every day. Some important friends of the chaparral, just some I want to highlight because I probably think they're really, really cute. Obviously, there's a lot more wildlife than these four pictures here. This here is burrowing owls, and what's important about them is that they take little holes that other animals have dug out and use them as their home. So these are called burrowing owls. Unfortunately, they are endangered. How cute, right? They don't live in trees, they live in burrows. This guy here is a San Joaquin kit fox, and this is the cutest thing you will see all day. Also endangered. It is a desert fox, probably more so in the desert than the chaparral, but it's still very close to where we live. These guys here, these are our California mountain lions, but they're babies. So when they're babies, they have that spotted fur to help with camouflage. And once they get older, they turn into that beautiful sandy color. This little guy right here is a dusky-footed wood rat. Also very important part of the chaparral ecosystem. The California gray wolf also is part of the chaparral, not only chaparral, but all the way up into your marine west coast climate zone. That is all his territory. So California was once populated by gray wolves, but by the 30s, they were extinct in California. They're still found in parts of Oregon, Washington, and Nevada, but we eradicated them because back then there wasn't really like a lot of information on conservation. And so they killed them all off. We killed them all off because there was bounties set for them, number one. Number two, people's livelihoods were a lot different back then, right? You had sheep, cattle, and that's about it. So if you saw a wolf in your backyard, you were going to kill it. So they became extinct. They have repopulated California on their own. So a California gray wolf came in from Oregon, and he crossed the Oregon border into California, and then he went back home, brought his girlfriend. They came back, and they by themselves repopulated California with California gray wolves that were once extinct, eradicated from California. So this is a huge scientific really comeback story, and you will have a few links about the gray wolves in California, about wolves really in California, because you know, if I were to ask you, if you were to reintroduce a wolf into an ecosystem, would it have a good or would it have a bad effect? So I want you guys to keep that question in mind. I don't want to give too much away, but there's going to be a really cool video in this module about that question. Reintroducing these apex predators, is it important? Is it necessary? Is it good or bad for the ecosystem? Okay, so just think about that a little bit. Here's another picture. I mean, he has a whole documentary about him. They call him the Lone Wolf. He's OR7, and there's his little trip he took. Pretty cool story, I think. California gray wolf's habitat is partially Mediterranean climate zone down here, mostly marine west coast, I would say. Extending along the coast of the western United States. Wolves are important members of the ecosystem. They're known as a keystone species. Now, keystone species, if a keystone species, is a species that keeps an ecosystem alive. If that species were to disappear, the entire ecosystem would crumble. So it is a keystone species. So are our Channel Island or California otters. They're also keystone species. So you will have a link for all that. So your California mountain lions, they are also part of your chaparral environment. So mountain lion P22 is actually the most famous cat in Hollywood, and that's what they do say. He has a whole day dedicated to him in Griffith Park. This guy here is very important and special because, number one, look at this picture here. Isn't that the most amazing picture? That is really the picture of your urban and wildlife interface, right? We live in an a wildlife area. We are encroaching on these beautiful animals and these beautiful species homes, right? So with that Hollywood sign in the back and that mountain lion there, that's like epitome of urban wildlife. And I kind of have like this, I'm very, very interested in urban wildlife. And so in different places in the world where you go, there's going to be different types of wildlife. Here we see a coyote. It's pretty exciting, right? But there's foxes, there's also bobcats, there's also mountain lions, right? And so this one here is special because he crossed 10 freeway lanes. He got into Griffith Park, and he's the only mountain lion in Griffith Park. And he's always kind of making his appearance on the media. He recently was allegedly found to eat a koala from the LA Zoo. So if you've been to Griffith Park, you know that everything's kind of connected there. Griffith Park, the observatory, I think it's a Greek theater. Yeah, the Greek theater, the LA Zoo, everything's there. So he made his way into the LA Zoo and he ate that koala. I mean, you can't blame him, right? He's just hungry. Unfortunately, when he did make his way into Griffith Park, he was at a point that was a perfect time for breeding, but he's the only cat there, poor guy. So he's alone. But yeah, he's in Griffith Park. He crossed 10 freeway lanes to get there, and he didn't get hit by a car while crossing those freeways, which is pretty remarkable. And there, of course, there's going to be a link for you guys to watch a little bit more about P22, my favorite cat. And then grizzly bears, they're not really part of the chaparral environment, but it is important for you guys to know a little bit about the bear on our flag, right? Grizzly bears are extinct in California, not in the world. They're just extinct in California. I think this is the last grizzly bear. How terrible, right? But again, there's a lot of shift and movement in terms of conservation. We don't do this anymore, right? It's frowned upon, but you know, we've learned a lot. Endangered animals of the chaparral, you have the Costas hummingbird, the coast horned lizard, the rosy boa, the Hierman kangaroo rat, your Santa Cruz kangaroo rat, and your California gnatcatcher. Different reasons for species endangerment, exotic plants and animals. And if you bring in even exotic plants, they're going to overtake that natural vegetation. And that natural vegetation is home to our endemic natural native species, right? Overgrazing by cattle, land loss because of cattle, right? And agriculture, animal agriculture, agriculture itself. A lot of our money, time, and energy goes to agriculture. So really cattle is king here in California. Not just cattle, I think really agriculture itself. And so it will kind of overrun that natural area. Does that make sense? And the natural area is home to all these species, and disruption of the natural fire regime. Okay, here are some more pictures of chaparral animals. I mean, most of us have seen a few of these. I kind of like freak out when I see skunks. I have a lot of not nightmares, but dreams that skunks are chasing me, like recurring dreams. I don't know what that means. Interesting, right? What we dream about. However, down the street, there was like a little skunk family, and the little baby skunks were like running around, and it was like the cutest thing. I think baby animals are so cute. Baby humans, not so much, right? Raccoons, gray fox. I've yet to see a fox, but they're here. A bobcat. There's bobcats. So all this, hopefully most of us have seen. All right, moving into Group D. So Group D, they only occur in the northern hemisphere because now we're moving into severe, mild mid-latitudes, okay? Only occur in the northern hemisphere because at these latitudes, there's no land at these latitudes in the southern hemisphere, okay? And a major control for these climate groups, Group D, severe mid-latitudes, is going to be continentality. So the land masses are broader at these latitudes than anywhere else in the world. So you're not really going to have that relief from the ocean, okay? So continentality is really a keynote in the D climates. For clearly recognizable seasons, a long cold winter, a relatively short summer, and transition periods from spring, which are spring and fall. Annual temperatures range are very large. The severe mild mid-latitudes are subdivided into two types based on temperature, humid continental and subarctic. Let's just look at what we're looking at here. So you're going to have humid continental and subarctic. So here's going to be your humid continental, that light blue, and subarctic is going to be the dark blue. Oh, that's it. That's it for Group D. Okay, let's go to Group E and H. So polar group. Your polar groups. So it's either going to be tundra or ice cap. That's the breakdown of Group E. The next slide will be Group H, sorry. In your polar climate zones, they're known for being very cold, but also for lacking moisture. And we kind of don't think of the poles being deserts, but they are a cold desert. They're considered a cold desert because they have a lack of moisture. So deserts range in different types. So you have a hot desert and a cold desert, and your polar areas are going to be cold deserts. So you have just two different subcategories in Group E. You have your tundra and you also have your ice cap. The only difference is in the tundra, you have 1 month that the average temperature exceeds freezing. So it's still very cold, but 1 month is just a little bit less cold, okay? And then Group H. Well, let's look what, so you have tundra and polar. These are going to be tundra, and then the pink will be polar, okay? And then Group H are much different. So this does not follow the rules of A, B, C, D, E. Group H is really altitude and exposure. So your climate is based on how high up you are, your altitude, okay? So Group H is different because it occurs all over the globe, right? Because the elevation is so high, you're gonna have much different climate in these areas versus the low-lying areas. So if you look, some of these areas are right in the middle of like a desert or a rainforest, right? But they are so high in altitude that that weather or that climate there is much different than the lowlands. So it doesn't follow the latitude. It's all about altitude and exposure to sun. All right, last few slides here. I'm going to try to get through this really quickly because when my lectures go over an hour, it takes forever to upload them on YouTube. So we talked about your climate zones. Now we're going to talk about climate change, okay? So before we discuss climate change, how do we understand that our climate is changing? How do we look at past climate? So paleoclimatology is the study of past climate. How do scientists study past climate? 6 different ways. Through tree rings, right? Dendrochronology. Yes, we do count the rings and it does tell us the years of a tree, but those rings tell us much more. And obviously we would not chop that tree down. You take these cores and you're able to look at those rings still, and the tree keeps living. So those rings can also tell us years of flood, environmental stressors, droughts. So that's how we get information from past climate, through tree rings. Oceanic sediments. Scientists can determine when periods of glaciation took place. So if there were periods of glaciation, then we can say, oh, it was much colder back then when we look at oceanic sediments. Oceanic floor sediments provide a record of the changing oxygen isotope ratio in seawater. Common marine Microorganisms excrete shells or exoskeletons, and the remains of these organisms build layer upon layer upon layer in the ocean. By looking at these layers, scientists can determine when periods of glaciation took place. Also, coral reefs. Coral reefs give us a lot of information because they develop in shallow waters. Okay, that's how coral reefs develop. So if we're looking at a coral reef in like the Mesoamerican Great Barrier Reef, the second largest coral reef in the world is in Mexico off the coast of Belize and Yucatan. So if you guys ever get a chance to go, don't go now during the pandemic, but go. I would highly suggest it. So coral reefs develop along very shallow water. So if you're looking at a reef and it is far out from the beach, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that your ocean used to be much lower. It tells you that our ocean levels have risen, and that tells you that a lot of our ice has melted. It's not like you just get brand new water. It's our ice caps that have melted. So coral reef heights really help us determine past fluctuations in sea level. Ice cores. Ice cores are a really cool way of getting information from the past. So analysis of ice cores gives us information about past climate. You drill down into glaciers and it's like a history book of snowfall going back hundreds of thousands of years. And within those ice cores, you have trapped bubbles of air. And within that air, they can say, okay, well, some of this dust came from Australia. Some of this pollen came from Africa. So they have so much information within those trapped bubbles of air. How they melt it and get those little bubbles of air, I don't know. But ice cores can also provide information about the composition of the atmosphere. Maybe there was more CO2, maybe there was less, maybe there was more particulates, maybe there was more methane. I don't know, so many things that they can tell us. Pollen analysis. Pollen from trees and other plants are preserved in lake bottoms. So we get a lot of information about the past from there. And so now let's look at causes of long-term climate change. Okay, so climate change is not just a man-made process. It is a natural process, but in order for us to understand that our hand as man, as humans, is really putting like the hand on the throttle when it comes to changing our climate, we have to also look at how our climate changes naturally, because it does. And I'm not going to say that it's only our fault, but a large part of it is our exploitation of resources and greenhouse gases and how quickly and unethically we're using resources from the planet, right? So let's look at causes of long-term climate change. Obviously, it's going to be about how that incoming solar radiation, right? How it's trapped, how it's reflected, right? Your concentration of greenhouse gases, the transfer of energy through atmospheric and oceanic circulation. All these things are variables that influence patterns of temperature. That's all we're looking at. The concentration of greenhouse gases, this is where we cannot deny the fact that humans are really adding to that. There's no way that we can change how much incoming solar radiation is going or leaving, right? But if we have more greenhouse gases, then more of that is trapped. So let's look at different reasons that climate is changing. Number one is through atmospheric aerosols. So we know that aerosols are those non-gaseous particles in the atmosphere, right? So things like natural aerosols are going to impact the climate, okay? So any large quantity of particulate that is ejected into the atmosphere, for example, by volcanic eruptions, is going to alter global climates, or global temperatures. So large asteroid impacts, anthropogenic sulfates and black carbon. Now that is man-made, but there has been instances in the past of large enough volcanic eruptions that have changed the climate and lowered our global climate about 2 degrees globally. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's actually a huge change. Now that was a long time ago. We haven't had a large enough volcanic eruption of that magnitude to change our climate, but that is a way that our climate changes naturally. Are you guys following this? And anthropogenic sulfates and black carbon, those are man-made, okay? So this is how aerosols act as a mechanism to really have a role in climate change and changing the climate. Fluctuations in solar output. So this isn't like something that humans cannot have fault for, or we cannot say that we did this, okay? Sunspot activity. Some years your sun is going to have more sunspots. Some years the sun is going to have less sunspots. So there is a link between past climates and variation in the energy output of the sun. So researchers have looked at the connections between climate and sunspot activity. Sunspots are dark spots that appear on the surface of the sun. Some scientists have noted that several past climate events, like the Little Ice Age, correspond with a period of less sunspot activity. So those are just natural mechanisms. And climate change deniers will say, you know what, humans, we are not strong enough or powerful enough to change the climate, and they will hold on to all these different reasons, right? And yeah, I mean, these are all natural variables. They are all natural mechanisms. Our climate is always changing, but you cannot deny the fact that our reliance on fossil fuels, our overuse of resources is really damaging the planet, okay? So those two together are going to really move that climate or really push that change or speed it up, right? Does that make sense? Variations in Earth-Sun relations. So this is what we learned at the first week of school. The way that the Earth is tilted, 23.5 degrees, right? That's going to change over time. The way the Earth is, the North Pole is tilted towards the North Star, right? The eccentricity of orbit. Right now we're going in the same elliptical trip around the sun, sorry. So all these things are going to change over time. Your orbit right now is elliptical. The shape of Earth's orbit varies every 100,000 years. So we don't know where we are within that cycle, but that is going to change, and that's going to have an effect on our seasons, on our climate overall, right? The inclination of Earth's axis. So every 41,000 years, we're going to either be tilted a little more lower or higher. That's going to change our climate. The orientation of Earth's axis, every 25,000 years, we're going to change our orientation. That's going to change the climate. But our greenhouse gas concentration, so that is something, even if we were not here on planet Earth as humans, there's still going to be natural sources of greenhouse gases. So things like water vapor, CO2, methane, these are all still natural sources. However, human enhanced greenhouse gases are things like nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, all these other things that are human caused, and also extra CO2, extra methane, extra water vapor in the atmosphere. So more of these greenhouse gases means more light or sun is being trapped, means more warming, means more ice melting, means higher sea levels, stronger hurricanes, dry areas become drier, wildfires come and they burn more, right? Does that make sense? So we are changing the climate. Anthropogenic climate change, that is human caused. Evidence of current climate change, changes in air temperature, changes in the oceans, our sea levels are rising, our hurricanes are being recorded stronger and more every single hurricane season. Our polar regions are changing. More ice is melting than ever before. We might lose Greenland. Greenland is covered with ice. It might all melt in our lifetime, that entire land area. That's huge. So you will watch a video about Greenland is melting in this module as well. Okay, guys?